Hello, Gold viewers. I'm Fiona Lang-Sharp, IPCLC, Public Relations Manager and MC for the Gold Midwifery Online Conference for 2015. Welcome to my interview with Dr. Robbie Davis-Floyd. Welcome, Robbie. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me here today. I just have a few questions about your up-and-coming presentation at the Gold Midwifery Conference and your topic, the emergence of the postmodern midwife. I'm very excited to hear about this. I remember looking at some of your abstracts and choosing this particular topic because I thought it would be of interest to our delegates. So I'm going to ask you right off the top a little bit about yourself, and I want to know, how did you get in the field of midwifery in the first place?
Well, I started out studying childbirth. I had to pick a topic for my dissertation in anthropology for my PhD, and I had cesarean for my birth. Before that, I had been studying myth, ritual, and shamanism in Mexico, and I thought I was going to do my dissertation about that, but I had the cesarean and I was very traumatized by it, and so I did what anthropologists are generally want to do. We start asking questions when we're curious about something. So
Right.
I started asking every woman I ran into who'd had a baby about her birth experience, and then I got interested in the topic intellectually as well as personally. So I ended up doing my dissertation on women's childbirth experiences, and out of that came my first book, Birth as an American Rite of Passage. And for that book, I had to do 100 interviews, mainly 100 because my math isn't good, and I can do, 10% of 100 is pretty easy.
Yeah.
So, but after interviewing that many women and then doing follow-up studies on another group of women who were just choosing cesareans and wanting to understand their motivations for that, I kind of got tired of interviewing women because the stories began to be kind of redundant, and I got really tired of hearing about women's disappointment with their birth experiences with their obstetrician and wondering why they didn't, make different choices in the first place if they were going to be so unhappy. It just got discouraging to hear how women just constantly bought into the cultural notion that technology is good and obstetricians are better providers. And by then I was giving talks at midwifery conferences. I think my first talk at a midwifery conference was from Manna in El Paso in 1991, or I think it was 91. Could have been 94, not quite sure there. And I walked into this motel and it was full of midwives, and the energy of walking through the door just about knocked me down. It was such strong midwifery energy. And at luncheon on the Sunday of the conference, somebody informally went around all the round tables for 8 people, 8 midwives were sitting at each table, and asked them, how many births have you attended, and do you think you've attended in your career as a midwife? Just a guess. And the total guess for the room was over 80,000 births. And while I understood that these home birth midwives only attend 1% or less of American births, still sitting in a room full of midwives who had attended over 80,000 births was quite impressive to me. And I realized that midwives are really the ones who can make a difference in the birth experience because they do have autonomy. Even in the hospital, midwives have some degree of autonomy, and they can make a difference. And so I became much more intrigued by midwives than birthing women at that point in my research. So I just started interviewing midwives like crazy about all kinds of topics. I did a study on midwives and use of intuition as authoritative knowledge, and I did a whole book called Mainstreaming Midwives, The Politics of Change, which was about the development of direct entry midwifery in the United States. And for that, I had to interview a lot of nurse midwifery educators because they also chose to develop direct entry midwifery, and a lot of home birth midwives and midwifery educators. And I still to this day find midwives in the United States and around the world to be incredibly intriguing and fascinating because they have the power to make a difference in a woman's childbirth experience.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more with your last statement, Robbie, and listening to your journey is just by far, it's a beautiful journey that you took, and it sounds like you had quite the strong will to keep digging deeper to find out, what happened. Some people I think would have given up listening to those repetitive stories, and I think that's sometimes what happens in our culture is people just accept it, that that's the way it is. And from listening to you, it doesn't sound like you were willing to accept anything, but you wanted to move forward and find that better way. So what a great story you have. So just briefly, can you tell me a little bit about what postmodern midwife means?
That is a concept that I came up with, the notion of the postmodern midwife, at that first MANA conference that I attended, MANA being the Midwives Alliance of North America, in El Paso in either 91 or 94. I just can't remember the date. But it was the first conference, first MANA conference where they had traditional Mexican midwives attending. They had brought a bunch of them up on scholarship, and they did a blessing way ceremony for these. They picked 4 of the eldest traditional midwives from Mexico, and they did a blessing way ceremony where they seated the 4 of them with their backs to each other, facing north, south, east, and west. And then all the younger American midwives came and kind of knelt and made offerings at the feet of these traditional midwives. And I was just sort of struck by the incongruity of this, like, did these young American midwives who were sort of worshiping these poor traditional Mexican midwives, poor in terms of economic poverty, but very rich in wisdom, did they know the circumstances of their lives, and did they get that these women, some of them lived in nice houses, and some of them lived in huts with dirt floors and were just extremely poverty stricken compared to the midwives who were kneeling at their feet giving them offerings? It was all very ironic. And my colleague Jan Lee Miller, she's also an anthropologist and a midwife, was standing next to me. We were watching this together, both kind of in shock as anthropologists, and she said, "How postmodern?" And I thought, that's it. This is incredibly postmodern. This is a sort of postmodern reverence. In the modern world, you look down on indigenous people. You devalue them because they're not modern. They're not progressive. They're not they're not cool because they're not modern. But they seem pre-modern from a modern perspective, vestiges of a past that we're trying to modernize ourselves out of. Sure. But a postmodern perspective values the pre-modern, values the indigenous. You know what you're talking to someone who's postmodern when they say, "Where are you from?" and you say, "I'm descended from the Cherokee," or "I'm an Inuit," and they go, "Oh, how cool," instead of thinking to themselves, "Oh, you poor thing." A postmodern perspective values indigeneity, values the things that modernity wanted to get rid of. So postmodern midwives, I went on and kind of ran with the concept that I always cited Jana Lee for. She was just said, "How postmodern?" But I made sure to cite her in the first article I published about postmodern midwives. And I began to define the postmodern midwife as one who takes a relative approach to different bodies of knowledge, to different knowledge systems. In my definition, postmodern midwives don't just buy into one particular way of knowing about midwifery and birth. They understand the obstetrical way of knowing. They understand the midwifery model of care. They take the time to study traditional and indigenous ways of knowing. They look at plants. They look at a lot of holistic therapies, like maybe Ayurveda or aromatherapy or Reiki or massage therapy. They don't confine themselves to one way of knowing, but they, again, take a relative approach to different ways of knowing. So they're not stuck in one approach. They can think outside the box, as it were, because they're not coming from inside of just one knowledge system.
Wow. That just blew me away. And as I was reading about this again in the abstract, I really was intrigued to know more about what you were trying to express, and that was a great synopsis, and it's kind of made me hungry to hear more. So that's a good thing. I'm very excited to hear what all your discoveries were, and as I was picturing that blessing way, it really moved me, and I can see how you can that just intrigued you so much to see what those midwives were thinking. So. But anyways, we've run out of time today, Robbie. We could chat for more, I know for sure. But at this point, we do need to wrap it up. So thank you so much for being with us here today and just, sharing your passions with us. I certainly appreciate it. And for all of our listeners out there, be sure to tune in to the Gold Midwifery online conference, and you will be able to hear Dr. Robbie Davis-Floyd and her topic of the emergence of the postmodern midwife. Thank you again, Robbie, for being with me here today. It's been just wonderful.
My pleasure. Thank you, Fleur.
Thanks again, everyone.